There's a change happening in the way we live, the way we work, the way we spend our money and make our decisions. We are evolving to be more conscious in our actions in a way that serves the world and makes it a better place. Welcome to the Ethical Evolution. The Ethical Evolution podcast is brought to you by the Ethical Change Agency. I'm Bindi, CEO and founder, and I am honoured to bring you the stories of those who create change through paying it forward and giving back. Ethical business owners and holistic healers who are determined to create collective change in the world. Once we have a change in consciousness, and through collective change, we can become one. My next guest was recommended to me by another guest, and little did I know that he fit perfectly into the ethos of the ethical evolution. When the Boxing Day Tsunami happened in Thailand and the Bali Bombings occurred, Peter Baines was the man they called to forensically investigate and identify thousands of bodies. From tragedy, he created hope and opportunity for many children orphaned or abandoned by disaster in Thailand by creating Hands Across the Water. Hands Across the Water started in 2005 and now cares for over 350 children across 7 projects in Thailand. In addition to leading Hands, Peter is the principal of Peter Baines Consulting. Peter helps businesses build effective, sustainable leadership programs through a unique mix of leadership and corporate social responsibility initiatives. Peter was awarded the Order of Australia Medal in 2014 for service to international humanitarian aid in Thailand. There is so much depth and learning in our conversation, and I hope it helps you see the world a little differently. Welcome, Peter, to the Ethical Evolution.
Oh, well, it's great to join you, Bindi.
Now, can you tell us about your background and who you are?
Yeah, sure. So for 20-odd years, I was a forensic investigator with New South Wales Police. And basically my job was to attend scenes of serious crime, deaths, suspicious deaths, homicides and fires, and examine scenes and report to the coroner and the courts as to what had gone on. And I did that for 20-odd years. I worked in Bali after the bombings in 2002 as part of the leadership team that was sent over there to identify the bodies. We had 202 people who died as a result of that. 88 were Australians. And I guess that kind of stamped a bit of a footprint for me, because it was then the Boxing Day Tsunami in 2004, which occurred, and I was called upon again to head over to Thailand, and that really defined my career. And I spent most of 2005 either in Thailand or preparing to go to Thailand, and I was leading the Australian and the international operation in the identification of those who died and repatriating bodies around the world. And then in 2006, I was invited to apply for an international secondment where I worked with Interpol in Lyon in France. And for 12 months, I was researching and then writing a classified paper on counterterrorism with a focus on what we call CBRN, which is chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear threats and trends. And that was supposed to be 12 months, but this comment was extended a couple of times. And I spent time with the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime throughout Southeast Asia in a capacity, building capacity around leadership and counterterrorism. And I'd go on to work in Saudi Arabia after the floods in the city of Jeddah, advising the government there, worked in Japan, so that was really my professional career was started in uniform in police and ended up traveling the world leading international crisis and disaster.
Wow. Oh my God. The stuff you must have seen, seriously. Like, how do you prepare yourself? Like, when you're heading to one of these countries, in the middle of a major disaster, how do you prepare yourself for something like that?
Yeah, like the work that we were doing, it was just a magnification of what our day job was.
Mm,
So when I worked on call as a practitioner, if a week went by where we weren't involved in the investigation of death in some way, that was an unusual week.
mm,
And the challenges faced in both Bali and Thailand, it wasn't around complex forensic science. It was just the enormity
mm,
and the scale and the unique challenges.
mm.
Arriving into Thailand, there was the 5,395 bodies that were recovered. That was and remains the world's largest ever disaster victim identification attempt undertaken. It was thousands bigger than 9/11
Wow.
and thousands bigger than anything before in an identification point of view. And, to your point, you're arriving into a country that has been decimated. And flying over on the plane, and it's not as though you have a lot of time
Mm,
to prepare for this kind of stuff. The first teams that went had 4 hours notice, and that included the travel time from Sydney to Canberra to board a chartered flight. So it's
wow.
kind of like quickly grab a bag and get to Canberra. And but it's I guess that's the unique aspects of what we faced. And arriving there, there's a whole lot of emotions you go through, and you go through a whole lot of different emotions while you're there.
Mm,
But we were there to identify and repatriate bodies, and we know that that was such an important role for the families who lost someone. And so for me, it was pretty clear while we were there, and the job that we were doing.
yeah. Wow. That just blows my mind, the amount and the volume you must have had to process in that time. That's just huge, in both
Yeah, like
instances.
turning up, I arrived at a place called Wat Yan Yao, and temples in Thailand are called a Wat, a W-A-T. And when someone dies in Thailand, they'll take the body to the temple.
Mm,
And so the natural response when they found the bodies washed up on the beach or in a hotel was to take them to the temple. And this temple at Wat Yan Yao um, was located north of the resort area of Khao Lak. And I arrived at this temple, and covering the ground was the decomposing bodies of 3,500 people. And they were quite literally arriving by the truckload. And no one has the capacity and the ready-made capacity to deal with that.
mm,
There was the bodies were just placed on the ground, and the bodies were in an advanced state of decomposition and continued to decompose.
mm,
And flying up there to that site for the first time in a helicopter, I could smell the death before we landed, and it's an unmistakable smell.
mm,
And well before I could see anything, I could smell what we were going into.
mm.
And they were just challenges that hadn't been faced before, and so they unique challenges certainly required unique solutions.
Wow, Peter. So in the work that you do now,
Mm.
what would you say is your mission?
Yeah, like all of my time now really is, during my last tour of Thailand in 2005, I met a group of kids who'd all lost their parents and were
Mm,
living in a tent. And I made a commitment to support them in some way. And I realised I couldn't change what had happened, but it felt within my capacity to change what happened next for them. And so I started a charity called Hands Across the Water. And the idea was, and I was quite naive when I started it, around the size of the challenge and how long it would go on for. But the idea was to build them a home and provide some safety for these kids, and build that home. And 15 years on, that's where I spend all my time now, is supporting these kids and hopefully providing some answers. And so my mission now is, on a contextual level. It's about creating a life of choice rather than one of chance for these children. And we measure our success by what happens when it comes time to leave for the kids.
Mm.
Have we equipped them to be able to live a life of choice rather than chance? And that's what I wake up each day and try to find answers for. And 2020 has certainly presented some challenges to that.
It sure has. And, just thinking about, where you've come from and where you are now, it's almost going from death to life, if we think of it that way. And can you tell us about, like, some of the kids that you've helped and the difference it's made?
Yeah, like, I think I'll preface what I say by acknowledging that the best place for children, all things being equal, is in a family.
Mm.
But when things aren't equal, when that safe environment, that safe family doesn't exist, then there's very much a role for what we do. And that first home I built was built for 32 kids, and within 12 months of opening it, the numbers doubled.
Wow.
And we had kids. The girls were sleeping through to a bed. The boys were on the floor in the hallway. And because what happened, and I've seen this repeated in all of the international countries I've worked in, and in the aftermath of crisis and disaster. And no better example than what we're seeing in Australia right now,
Mm.
with those struggling with the bushfires.
Mm.
Like, when was the last time you saw something about the plight of the Australians who lost their families, lost loved ones? It's we move on so quickly.
We do.
And acknowledge that COVID has certainly presented something different, but that doesn't change the challenges. Those who lost their families, lost their homes, that are still sleeping in caravans here in Australia, that doesn't change their plight.
Mm.
And that's what I saw occur in Thailand, is that there were plenty of big international charities that turned up. There was government, there was corporate, there was NGOs. They turned up, they provide assistance, but too many leave too quickly.
Mm.
And we built the home, and then we just saw the numbers continue to grow. And so that was the origins. But I think, to your point around the change, I'll give you a couple of examples. And one is from that first home we built, and two kids I'll talk to you about. One is a boy by the name of Gain, and he was living with his auntie at the age of 12 in Thailand. And there was a lot of alcohol and violence in that house. And at the age of 12, they said to Game, if you want to remain living in this house, you need to leave school, get a job, and pay your own way. If you don't do that, you need to move out. You can't stay here any longer. And the thought for him of moving out and living on his own at the age of 12 wasn't too appealing. So Game went to school, and he advised his teachers. He said, I'm going to have to move out, and I'm going to have to leave school. Otherwise, I'm going to have to move out of home. And they saw what a travesty that would be. They saw the potential that he had shown. And they contacted us and said, do you have room for one more? And we said, of course we do. And so Game was able to move in and live at Bantham Nam Chai, which was the first home we built. Now, it didn't mean that he was taken away from his family. It didn't mean that he ceased to have contact. It just meant that he could live in a safe environment, free of alcohol, free of violence, and he was able to remain at school.
Mm.
And the thing was, he was the first of our kids to graduate from high school. He was the first of our kids to go to university, and we supported him through a scholarship, and he went on and graduated with a law degree.
Wow.
He came back and worked as our general manager, looking after our 7 properties in Thailand, and now he's studying his MBA on the weekends. Similar, we had a young girl by the name of Mook. She lost her entire family in the Boxing Day Tsunami, and we supported her through school. We supported her through university. She graduated with a degree, and she now lives in Sydney and works for an advertising agency in Pyrmont. And she has no known living relative left in Thailand. She has no desire to return to Thailand. There's nothing for her there.
Mm.
And the thing when we talk about the change, when we talk about life at choice, is both of those young adults now have choice for themselves. But importantly, they have choice for when they have children.
Mm.
And, this has been a generational change, and it's such a small impact. But you ask those kids or those young adults if it's insignificant or if it's small, because for them it's changed their life.
Yeah.
And the second example I'll give you is something that continues to this day is in 2010 I was introduced to a lady by the name of May Phil, who lived in a remote part of Thailand called Yosaton. It's in the Isan, north of Bangkok, and she'd been there for about 28 years and supporting kids who have HIV or who have lost their parents to HIV. Many of the children that she would care for would be brought to her by government, by the hospitals, by the police, and many of these kids were born into young girls and young women who are not much more than kids themselves, living in the hill tribes as stateless citizens, getting pregnant and with HIV, which brought shame to their family, and they're giving up these children and no one wanted them. Well, Mayfield took these kids on. But the challenge that she faced was that she didn't have enough money or enough resources to provide the medicine that all of them required. And she had to decide on an all too frequent basis which children would live and which would die, and who would get the medicine and who would not, who would get the complementary medicine they needed to take with the HIV medicine, who would get nutritious food and who would not. And in the 28 years that she was there, she's buried 1,027 children.
Wow.
And, I was introduced to her and believed that we could make a difference. And for the past 10 years, we've been meeting 100% of her operational costs up there, and we stopped kids dying. And, ever since then, the kids who have been there, they don't die anymore. She still receives on an all too frequent basis children that come to her as a last place of hope. But because of the generosity of Australians in the main who support Hands Across the Water, we're able to provide the resources, the access to medicine, the access to new accommodation, and meet the needs of these kids. So, when we talk about change, there's those young adults who are now hugely contributing members of society and will go on to make a real difference. But there's also those kids who are alive today, and but for Hands and but for the generous community that we have, there is no question they wouldn't be.
That's incredible. That's huge change for not just those kids, but everyone in their lives and everyone that they touch now. And that ripple effect that you've created is just incredible. So you're talking about funding there. How are you funded at the moment?
Yeah, so two ways. When I started the charity, I was working for the police,
Mm.
and so I had a full-time job, um, and how I started raising money was I got invited to speak at conferences on my experiences working on and leading international teams, and I was paid what I thought at the time and what I continue to think is a ridiculous amount of money for someone to share a story, but that became the fundraising.
Mm.
So I would go out and speak at conferences and for companies and different organisations, and they would pay me money, and I used that money to start the charity. And for a long time, it was just me, and as I said, I was still paid. I was still working full time in a job, and so there was no operating expenses. And so Hands started as an organisation that didn't spend any percent of donors' funds on administration because there was none.
Mm.
And but then that would certainly change around the costs. But what I saw was important to donors was that we weren't spending their money on administration or fundraising. But I also knew that that wasn't sustainable.
Mm.
And so in 2011, I set up a company, and the company is now called Hands Group, and it sits next to the charity. Now, the role of Hands Group is to undertake commercial activities that raises money, not through donations, but raises money, and that money is used to fund the operation, the administration, and the fundraising expenses of the charity. So effectively, it pays for the Australian staff to run the charity who undertake the fundraising activities. So we've got two separate entities, and the flow of money is very clear. We just follow the rules of the ATO,
Mm-hmm.
and if the ATO says that someone, if they classify it as a donation, well, 100% of that goes into charity. If they're getting a fee for service, if they're getting service, well, then that goes into Hands Group. And so for the success of Hands Group is since 2013 in our the real way is that we've been running a conference series called The Future of Leadership. And this year it was supposed to appear in 10 locations across Australia, and businesses and different people come for a day of leadership. And we have all of these amazing speakers that we've been able to connect in through my network who appear at no expense. So all the profits that come go into Hands Group, and
Mm.
that's the funding for us. We would have had over 2,000 people attend this year, and the format is very similar to a TED conference,
Yep.
but it's based on leadership, and that's been a success for us in the Hands Group in the commercial side. Now, the charity, how we've raised our money is we see ourselves very much as a service provider. So we don't go out and we don't call you at dinner time and ask you to make a donation. We don't put photos up of sick kids and ask you to tap into your guilt.
Mm.
We seek to engage our community by providing them with a meaningful experience. And a big part of that for us, up until March of this year, was leading these groups into Thailand on these bike rides.
Mm.
And this year we were supposed to have 250 people across 6 different rides who are raising somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 for the privilege of riding 500 or 800 kilometres. And it's something that we started in 2009. I've led 30 of these rides, and they're incredible experiences. And it's been, such a great, not just a source of income, but such an amazing way to build a community.
Mm.
They're an inclusive ride. They're not about riding as fast as you can, and we have people who come and ride, and they hands down say it's a highlight of their year.
Mm.
And it's creating these experiences for people. So that's the way that we've raised our money, and to today we continue to guarantee that 100% of any donations go to the kids and communities. and Hans Group continues to fight on. Every we stand for, and with our ability, because all of our fundraising has occurred through either bringing people together, such as Future of Leadership, or taking them to Thailand.
Mm.
And right now we can't do either.
I was going to say to you, like, no doubt COVID's had an impact on your efforts this year.
But if it wasn't for some very smart people on the board of the charity, who years ago set a mission to have 1 year's operating costs saved and banked.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for that position, we would be like a lot of charities who would have folded. There was an industry report that came out from the charity sector by an industry body who surveyed charities, and 32% of them said they wouldn't survive 6 months.
Mm.
Now, there's 60,000 charities in Australia. You're talking about 20,000 charities not existing.
Wow.
Or, and you go, well, what happens to the people that were employed by those charities? What happened to the services that they provide? Thankfully, because we were in such a good position, because we had a good board, because and this is just how people around, we'd save the money, and for a rainy day, well, it turned out to be one hell of a bloody storm. But that savings has allowed us to see our way through, and we've been rapidly reinventing and creating new opportunities. And the really interesting thing that I see is that our community within Hands is such a supportive community, and it's not. I don't think that what we're certainly not experiencing the fact that people are saying, I don't have the income to support you, or I don't want to support charity, I need to hang on to your money, onto their money. What we're experiencing is just the opportunities where we used to engage with them don't exist. We took one of our bike rides that we normally do in Thailand, and we launched a virtual experience. So we said, so we had our partners in Thailand, drive the 800-kilometre route, recorded it all on Zoom.
Wow.
And then we broke it up. And each morning at 7 a.m., then at midday, we ran a Zoom session for the month of June. And we raised, and here's the thing, the idea was floated 2 weeks before we launched it. We launched it, and then we set about, collecting all this collateral and creating the experience. And we had 240 people. We raised $292,000 in that month of June, and that was just real evidence that there's still a lot of generosity out there, and people. Certainly even within our board, people were skeptical and worried that because of the bushfires that people would be tapped out. But I think there's an immense generosity, particularly when people can see and have an understanding and transparency of the difference that they're making. You look at the criticism that came out or continues to come out of charities, and when they've received money and it hasn't been spent. Now, that's a different conversation I won't go into, but the question, the thing is, people just want to know the money's gone where they intended.
Yeah.
And because we're small, because we have that real visibility, that transparency, as I say, I don't think it's a case that we're struggling with people to donate because they don't want to or they don't have the money. It's just now it's the opportunities where we used to be able to take them to Thailand and we can't.
And this is it. There's been so many challenges in 2020, and right back from the beginning of the year with the bushfires, and so many people gave money at that point, and we've been going through so much disaster and change fatigue this year. You'd think that people would tap out, but I think there's almost been a change in mindset this year where people are actually understanding what really matters.
You're absolutely right, Bindi, and I think the real evidence for me was that in the beginning of the month of March, we had 60 odd real estate agents from across Australia who come together as part of an initiative called Digital Live, and
Mm.
they ride in Thailand for us, and they raise all this money. Now, it was they were supposed to raise $5,000 each, and their target that they were working towards was 250 grand.
Mm.
Now, we have a policy within Hands that if you don't raise your money, you don't ride,
Mm.
because it's not fair on those that have raised their money. So it's not discretionary. It's not give it your best shot. It's raise the money or don't.
Mm.
Don't come, and that's what it's been since 2009. Now, the Digital Live crew, the real estate crew, they were sitting well below 100 grand, and it was only weeks before the ride, and this was in the height of the bushfires, and I just, sent a message out to them and just said to them, just because of this is what's going on in Australia doesn't mean the challenges have changed in Thailand.
Mm.
The kids, that their costs haven't gone down because we've got fires here in Australia, but they put their shoulder to the wheel. They were supposed to raise 250. Now, in the midst of all that was going on in supporting Australia, they raised $470,000.
Whoa.
Now, they did that because they were engaged, because they could tell the message. And this is what I see. I see that, for a lot of people, they adopt a mindset of abundance rather than scarcity, rather than saying, well, I'll give, my $500 to the bushfires. What I saw and what I continue to see is that people go, yeah, I'll give $500 to the bushfires, but I'll also give 500 to you because that's where I was going to spend my money. What's occurred at home is something that's so out of the ordinary. I'll draw an extra 500 out or so forth, and
Mm.
so I think that the charity fatigue and donor fatigue and so forth exists when there's not the message, there's not the story, there's not the transparency behind it. Because my experience is when you can provide that, people are generous,
Mm.
people are caring by the very core of them.
Mm. Absolutely. And I'm interested to know, Pete, in all that you've been through and in your work in charity at the moment and also in your police work, what would you say has been your biggest challenge and how have you overcome it?
Well, let's have a chat in 2021 and I'll tell you whether I've overcome it or not, because right now is the biggest bloody challenge by no stretch.
Yeah.
Like there's, like the things in Thailand, like I remember sitting with one of Australia's leading pathologists, and we were sitting on a step, and in front of us was over 3,500 bodies,
Mm.
and they were laid on the ground. They were decomposing. They were exposed to the sun. We didn't have body bags at that stage. We didn't have the ice. We didn't have shipping containers to put them in. They were just on the ground.
Mm.
And he said to me, all we can do here is a token effort because of the size of it. But 12 months later, the international community had identified over 5,000 of that 5,395. And, I think the biggest challenges are best taken on one bit at a time,
Mm. Mm.
and, when we started with Hands, like I had no idea what I was going to do. It's now an organisation that's raised $25 million that supports, several hundred kids across Thailand. We have, 19 kids that have graduated from university. We've got another 20 odd or 20 kids currently in scholarships. We had these kids dying from HIV. And I think sometimes if we look at the totality of the problem, we can be frozen in our inability to take action. But I think whether it might be just naivety or ignorance or whatever it is, I've just, you just start taking action. the more action you take, the clearer you become.
Mm,
And I often say that when we started hands, I had no idea of what the answers were. I didn't even know what the questions were, but you just start, and I think whether it's whether it was those 5,500 bodies in Thailand, whether it was starting an organization, or whether it's the challenges that we face now, I just know the more we do, the closer we get to the answer. And it doesn't mean that everything we do is right,
mm.
but if you wait until you've got all of the information, all of the answers, well, someone will have beaten you to it. Someone will have taken precedence, and someone will hold that space. And so I think it really is the biggest challenges, as I say, whether they're the bodies in Thailand, hands, or what we face now, it's just continuing to take action.
That is so true. And you know what? That's a bit of a theme that I've heard over all my conversations I've had with successful entrepreneurs and change makers around the world is, no matter what you've got to face, no matter how big or small, just start.
Yeah.
Like, there's not going to be a perfect time.
Mhm.
And the more you sit and put yourself in analysis paralysis, you're just going to freeze and get nowhere. And that overwhelm of looking at the entire problem, like, no doubt, you wanted to sit there with those 3,000 bodies and just go, oh my God, this is too much for me to handle. But, if you can take it a bit at a time, it's the only way you're going to get there.
I think you're spot on. I think it's one of the things that where I found myself continued to be drawn and challenged, and let's not beat around the bush, excited by disaster and crisis
Mm,
was, what you were faced with was so, it was there was so much complexity, unknown, uncertainty, and all of this, disaster. But I just loved how whatever you did, you could see the results of that so quickly.
mm,
And it was one of the big reasons why I resigned from the police. Was, I'd worked in Bali, I'd worked in Thailand, I'd worked in these different international stages, and to think that I was going to go back and be back in this slow moving massive organization, because I was in a fairly senior position at that stage, where you spent time sitting in meetings deciding whether you should have a 15 or 17-inch monitor. And I was just going, yeah, not for me.
mm,
How do you work at this level and come back?
mm,
And it was, as I say, one of the things that I've always loved about, that crisis time is going, well, let's just try something and let's keep making decisions. And you don't have to wait 3 years to see if what the outcome or the results of your work.
mm.
It's almost immediate. And as
Yeah.
I say, it's not, doesn't mean it's right, but you don't have to wait.
Yeah, I so know what you mean. Like, sitting in that corporate world where you could do so much more, and make a huge difference elsewhere, and actually taking that leap and making that change. I think that's incredible if you can do that, and it's what you thrive on, obviously,
Yeah,
and being able to make that change is just so good.
yeah.
Now, Pete, I'm going to ask you: can you define what being ethical means to you?
I think it's you know I guess it's about your actions, that you're happy for, to be to stand behind them, and to have others look at what you've done, and is the work that either we're doing now, or the work that for the first 20 odd years, where everything I did was resulting in being tested on your decisions in courts by leading barristers in front of juries and so forth. And I think that instilled and the fact that I studied science at university, and then I studied law. I've always had that evidence-based approach to things, and And I think the ethics of that is, I guess it's how others will view what you've done, and if you're happy and transparent about that. And I often wonder, and this isn't about being unethical, and I'm not suggesting it, but I often wonder why some of the other charities don't refuse to reveal their costs and so forth. And I go, like, if it's like, we put all of our audited accounts on our website for people to trawl through and
Mm,
question, and you go, well, we're just a conduit of the money.
mm,
If you give me the money, it doesn't become mine. You just entrust us with it to make some decisions because we're in an informed position. And so I guess it's just having that open book approach to what you do. And and as I said, my first 20 years of my working career was that from the moment you stepped into a crime scene, you knew that someone at some point in time, a lot smarter than you and a lot more time, would be looking over what you'd done.
mm.
And and if there was whether it was even unethical or just you know ordinary or not diligent behavior, you'd be caught out.
Mm.
And so I don't know. I feel like I've just waffled about that answer,
No,
but
not at all. Not at all. You have nailed it. And I was just thinking, of all the guests I've had, probably on paper, you're the most qualified to be ethical. Like, with your background and your education, really, pretty much all the results you produce would be based on ethics of some sort.
yeah,
Um,
I think certainly in the sector that we're in now, one of the things I do find challenging is that the way the charity sector, and there's things that we do that I don't agree with, but we're forced to.
mm,
And what I mean by that is the fact that we have hands grouped a separate entity is so that we can run the organisation not through donations,
mm,
but we can run the organisation as we see fit. There's this massive issue within the charity sector around what people get paid and where the administration costs are spent and so forth. But no one gives a rat's ass about that in private business.
mm,
No one walks into your local dress shop and asks the owner how much they're being paid and what's their salary and what's the rent and what's the profit on this dress that you're about to spend, $400 on. But give, $200 to a charity, and people feel like they then have an entitlement
mm,
to tell you how to use those funds and to expect, that, what someone should be paid. And what it does is it drives either inefficiencies in the charity sector, or how can the charity sector compete for the best talent when the charity sector through public opinion can't pay
mm.
top salaries?
Exactly.
How does that ever work where we're in that position of operating on a level playing field? And I think it creates a really difficult space because of that nature and because of the way that people feel what they're entitled to when they support a charity, as opposed to just giving money to someone else. It's this
Mm.
whole different playing field that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean, and I've spoken to so many charity founders here in Australia, and so many of them don't get paid. They don't take a wage, and you think, you poor buggers, like, you are helping so many people, just to stay alive, and you're not even helping yourself, and some of them have almost ended up homeless themselves. So, you
you
know,
know it's like you spoke about entrepreneurs and so forth, And like if you and I decide that we're going to go into business together and we have this cracking idea, and we do a capital raise, and we raise $2 million to pursue this idea, and people commit because they think they're going to get a return. If we operate in an ethical way and the business doesn't succeed, well, we're called entrepreneurs because we had a go.
Yeah.
If you give me $2 million though into the charity space and I invest it in something that fails, well, I'll be on the front page of the paper called a crook, a criminal,
Mm. Mm.
and it's just this different playing field, and we found a way to, I think the structure that we had, it shouldn't need to occur. But I can't change public opinion on that level. So we just operate in the best way where we go, all the donors' money goes here. You have full transparency of it,
Mm.
and then we'll operate the business in this space where people feel like, well, then I don't have to account for, what we're doing to generate funds.
Yeah, and I think the model that you've got is so great, and there's so many charities that could learn from you in that space. As painful as it is to manage, I think the governance in Australia around charities really has to change, because it really is making them hamstrung and not letting them succeed like they should.
Yeah, and I certainly don't. I don't advocate that our model is the best.
No.
It just works for us,
Mm.
and it's what works for our donors. I think what we get too caught up in this sector and the public, and where that's come from, I don't know. But this bias around what is spent on administration, that I think part of the sector doesn't do itself well when people hide it. When
Mm.
you've got big household charities who refuse to disclose it,
Mm.
well, that creates skepticism.
Yeah.
People then ask the question, well, why won't you disclose it?
Mm.
And if we had, we have barcodes on a can of soup that tells you how much sugar, salt, flavor, and everything else is in a can of soup. If we had something similar in the charities that we just said, here, let's just all operate on the same field. If you have tax deductibility, these are your requirements. Well, then perhaps everyone would start to trust a bit more
Mm.
if the information was there. When we hide the information, well, then we create an impression that something's not right.
Exactly right. Yeah. So it might be hard at this point to answer, but what are your future plans for the charity?
Yeah, like up until the beginning of this year, well, up until probably March this year, we had some really big plans. The first was we're building and it's fun. It's built. It's about to open a learning centre at Yossaton, and which is the HIV home, and the model of that learning centre is it'll operate as a as a preschool during the day, and so kids who don't have access to that early childhood in those formative years because of lack of money or lack of citizenship or so forth, and they're missing out. They might be with the itinerant workers who are in Thailand illegally or so forth, and their kids miss out on school. So we're creating we've built this facility, but the real thing I love about it is that once the doors close for the little kids, well then we push aside the little tables and big tables come out, and then it becomes adult learning for the older kids. Now, what we're doing is working with a couple of partners, and we're providing digital education for these kids that lead them directly into jobs. So it's around coding, it's around different technology skill sets that are in demand. So we don't provide training for something that leads to a certificate but no job.
Yep.
And it's not about qualifications, it's about direct training that leads to employment. So we've got a partnership with a rather large business in Thailand who has given us an agreement that we provide the training for these kids. Therefore, we can then undertake this business work. The kids will then be paid, and then within a couple of years, we'll be able to set them up in their own business. So that's certainly one of the projects. The other projects, we were very close to the start of a hospitality training centre down in the south. So in the area of Khao, which is the area where the tsunami was worst affected, is a tourist area. And the biggest challenge the hotels face down there is getting good staff and getting trained staff. And so we've got a centre there that requires very little capital investment to make it fit for purpose, that we will then operate as a hospitality training centre, so providing opportunities not just for our kids but for the community to be upskilled, that will lead to greater employment opportunities for them, which leads to greater income, which leads to a better standard of living for them, and provides a service to the hotel industry, which is not there right now. And then finally, another project was we had the government come to us, and on the work that we'd done, they offered us a school which has been empty for a couple of years because of low attendance rates. And I looked at all that we do. We provide access to school, to university. We take care of healthcare. We provide training opportunities. The one thing that's missing, Bindi, if we're completely honest, around what we provide access to for the kids is sport. And what kids, don't love sport, and how important is it to them into their growth and development. And so I said, okay, well, let's build a sports academy. And we've got the land. It's a beautiful lot of land, but it's going to take some real capital investment to turn that around. And so sadly, I'd had some investors there who looked at it with me and could see the dream. I've had some great contacts with high-profile sporting people here in Australia who are 1,000 miles an hour behind it with me. And but that's all come to an end right now. And that'll take some time before I can revisit that one. So I'm disappointed about that. But on the good side, the training centre will be up and running within the next couple of weeks.
Wow. You don't do things in halves, do you? You must, feel so much reward in what you do.
Yeah, like seeing the kids graduate from university, seeing the kids who come to Dan Home Hug in such so sick, and where they're being they've been given up, they've been left at hospitals. These young mums have abandoned the kids, and there's some absolutely horrific stories that I don't share because I think people wouldn't believe me if I shared these stories. And to see the opportunities that kids have, to see the difference that can be made. But equally, Bindi, the thing that I love just as much is the strength of the communities that we create here in Australia and in New Zealand, and our supporters. And we saw that with the virtual ride that we ran in June, how they responded, and this global community there's so many who are just true friends. And that's because of what we've been able to create, collectively. And so there's immense satisfaction that comes from those areas for sure.
You're a karma millionaire in my book. I'm going to give you that one. Now, how can we support you and get behind what you're doing?
Yeah, I guess the thing is, it needs to, and I appreciate that question, but it really needs to be something that makes sense to the listeners to the podcast. And if they wanted to have a look, there's two real areas I'd direct them to. One is the futureofleadership.com.au,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we provide all of our leadership development and membership programs and conferences and so forth, which is that, as I said, we have businesses who engage with us because of the value, not because it's supporting charity, and we've been very, very mindful in going down that way because we wanted to make sure the identity of that stood out first and foremost. So futureofleadership.com.au or handsacrossthewater.org.au is a charity.
Mm-hmm.
And if people are interested, they can obviously connect in all the typical ways that they do and check it out and see if there's something that resonates for them.
We're going to share those links on Facebook and get people's eyeballs on that one for you. Now, I've got the final big question for you, Pete, and I can't wait to hear what your answer is. What's the change you'd like to see in the world, and how can we bring it to life?
I think I guess, when I think about the change that I've seen and the positive way is if you start from a position of doing something for others without an expectation of reward, the reward comes.
Absolutely.
We all need to do well. And, I've written a couple of books, and my second book was called Doing Good by Doing Good. And it's really around how creating a blueprint for how businesses can turn corporate social responsibility into a profit center. And because if they do, well, then the charity sector benefits more, and there's a belief that we shouldn't, and people go, oh no, that's not why I do it. I go, no, that's bullshit. You just haven't, arrived at the point where you think you can say that and it'd be okay, But I think if we, and this is certainly the philosophy with Hands, is that we've always started from the point of saying, how can I provide value to you first and foremost? So Bindi as an individual, as ethical change agency, what can I do to support you? And if I do that, I know it comes back. Just this morning, and I don't know if I can, well, I'm going to say it anyway, but just this morning, we've decided that for anyone in Victoria, we're going to create free access to our annual membership program for the duration of lockdown, which is a program that's, it's $900 a year, and we're just going, any of our community in Victoria who are now back in lockdown for another 6 weeks, so many of them who are now out of work, who, whether temporary or permanently, without that purpose. And I just know, and we were out this morning and seeing the sunrise on the beach and just talking about what we could do for our community in Victoria, because we've got so many wonderful people down there. And we said, how about this? Let's just give this stuff away. Let them have some time to, hear from amazing, inspiring people. And I think that served us really well. So if it was another long-winded answer, but I think, if we can start from a place of generosity, then we all do well. And, when I started Hands, I couldn't have been in the worst position in my life on so many levels. But by doing so much for others, I'm richer in every measure of my life because I decided to start Hands, and yeah.
You are one amazing human, can I just say? And I love how you just casually threw in there, I just wrote a couple of books. Just a couple of books. Peter, I can't thank you enough for joining me.
My pleasure. It's been a really cool chat. I've enjoyed the chat, Bindi. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Ethical Evolution podcast. If you're an ethical business owner, change maker, or holistic healer who's determined to make a change in the world and you need support to spread your message, visit ethicalchangeagency.com to collaborate.
Hey there, I'm DC. I host the rock podcast, Back to the Arena, The Interviews. It's about a 30-minute podcast where I talk one-on-one with a band who has released new music. You can find us on all the best podcast sites like Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, and more. If you're a rock fan like me, subscribe today to Back to the Arena, The Interviews.
Electricast.
Miles, are you ready to record our promo for Season 2 of the Wanna Bet podcast?
David, have you ever seen a grown man naked?
Miles, we're not here to quote lines from Airplane. We're here to tell people that Season 2 starts August 18th.
But I like Airplane.
I know you do, but Wanna Bet is a sports betting podcast. Each week we bet $1,000 on the NFL teams and games that we love.
Well, that sounds like fun.
It is fun. And last year you picked over 60% of your games correctly.
How'd you do?
We're not talking about that. We are telling people that they can find us every Friday. So no more movie quotes.
Roger.
Electricast. Electricast.